So, without further ado, Jonathan will tell us about a tenner and a box of kippers.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's lovely to be able to talk, and I hope that you'll shut me up if I talk too much. And anyway, I started my writing career, as it were, back in the about more than 20 years ago, and I wanted to write a book about Ernie Hunt. You remember Ernie Hunt from the
Oh yeah.
And he scored that famous donkey kick goal. It was called Carr leapt with the ball between his ankles and flipped it back, and Hunt volleyed it into the net. It was later that sort of goal was banned because they said the ball hadn't turned its circumference more than once before being struck again. But I wanted to write a book about Ernie because not just because of that and because of the positive things about his career, but I wanted to find out more about the bribery that Coventry had been involved in their first two seasons in the First Division in 67-8, 68-9, when there was evidence that they had bribed opponents in order to secure their First Division survival.
Wow.
For one reason or another, that book never got written for reasons of partly libel and slander. So, but it's still an interesting story to tell. Anyway, a short time after that, I took over a contract from somebody else to write a book about Coventry. And it was called A History in 50 Matches, which is exactly what it was. It was focused through 50 matches. We then, that came in on time, and they were very happy with it, the publishers. And although I say so myself, it was of its kind a good book. I was talking then to my commissioning editor, and we were casually chatting on the phone about this and that. And I was talking about George Hudson. Do any of you remember George Hudson? He was a prolific centre forward for Peterborough and Coventry in the 60s, and of a player of some finesse for that position at that time, at that level of the game. Anyway, somebody said to me, "Why don't you write a book about him?" And I said, well, if that's an invitation to write a book for Tempest, a biography for Tempest, the person I'd really like to write about is Keith Hansel. And he said, well, that's extraordinary because this very morning we've been having a conference about potential subjects for future sport biographers. And Keith was one of the names who came up. So I contacted Coventry City, and they didn't have any contact details for him. But then I got in touch with the PFA, and I spoke to a very nice lady who said, well, of course, I can't give you his contact details myself, but I will get in touch with him and ask him whether he'd like to phone you, which he did. And Keith was genuinely very surprised I wanted to write a book about him. But a couple of days later, I went up to York and had lunch together. And we had a wonderful afternoon together, just talking about so many things for hours. And he amply fulfilled for me my impressions of him in a broadcast interview. And he was saying he remembered, for instance, scoring the third goal against Sheffield Wednesday, I'm afraid, at Hillsborough in the quarter-final. And at the Leppings Lane end, he said he just fell to his knees in front of the Coventry supporters. And he said, you know, I could see men crying. I could actually see men crying.
That would have been me.
That was Keith. That was John.
Yeah.
And then he said, when we went back to Hillsborough for the semi-final against Leeds, Leeds were all over us in the first. Dirty Leeds. And they scored. And he said, I will never forget the intensity and depth of the roar of the Leeds fans. And it was so sort of awesome. And he was talking later too about after the game when he went up with the other players to the TV studio at the top of Wembley Stadium after the final. And he was standing there momentarily on his own as they were waiting to go in and be interviewed by Jimmy Hill. And he said, you know, I was looking down on the ground, I was looking on the grass and the terraces, and it had all gone. It had sort of come and gone. And all that there was just the breeze of the litter across the terraces in the wind. And he said it was extraordinary, that feeling that this great moment had happened in his life and everybody's life there, but it hadn't gone any further. That was the end of it. So I came back very excited, and I wrote my proposal for Tempus, and they costed it, and they issued contracts for both Keith and me. It wasn't going to be a ghosted autobiography, but he would give me all the help I needed, and in return for a share of the royalties. So I used then to go up to Thirsk, where he met me off the train always, and we'd go back and have a bit of lunch and to his house, which is disused branch line, a beautifully converted station property there, right out on the top of the moors. And I put the tape recorder on, and we just talked for hours and hours and hours. And he'd deliver me back to the station in the evening. And Moni, my wife, at that stage, she had a PA who was a speed typist. And so she very kindly used to transcribe these interviews and give me a few days later absolute beautiful transcript of everything that had been said. So I was very lucky in that respect. I said to Keith, once, I said, that goal you scored at Wembley, you must for 24 hours, given that there was satellite coverage all over the globe at that stage already, you must have been about the most talked about a man on earth for 24 hours. And more than the Pope, more than the president. And he laughed, he hadn't thought of it. He said, yes, I suppose I was. And I said to him, what I really wanted to write about, I wasn't obviously, of course I did want to write about the Coventry aspect, but I wanted to write about the arch of his career. How did that extraordinary moment, that great moment in his life and in the life of Coventry City, how did that come about? Where did it come from? Where did it go to? And I was as interested in writing about Hartlepool, where he started and finished his career, as I was about writing about Coventry. And I ended up wanting to write a travelogue about all the places he played, Hartlepool, and then on to Leyton Orient, and then back up to York and Scunthorpe, Coventry, Hibernian, Port Vale, and back to Hartlepool again. And some of these places, I'd never been to Hartlepool, and I didn't know one or two of the other places very well. And I wanted to write a book about these places as well as about the football. And I loved Keith's perspective on where he'd been and on his career. And anyway, we set about this, and he was, I think, a bit anxious to begin with as to what my line was, and that I was a journalist. I wasn't, and we soon got over that. And he said to me, I said to him once, I said, it's extraordinary writing about you, Keith, because there's so many things you keep saying which remind me of my career as a musician. I'm a professional violinist, and so I've worked in studios, concert halls all my life. And, I appreciate, therefore, when the red light goes on and when you've got an open goal in front of you, how you can miss the open goal. It's like getting your bow on the violin string at the beginning of a concert. It's like, as I say, when the red light goes on. And so I had an instinctive understanding of what it was like to run out on a football pitch when you're feeling terrible, and when they've got a problem at home, or you've got this and that, and everything has to go out of the window. You have to focus on what you're doing. And he was very good at grasping what I needed, and he understood. We both understood the sort of humor of being a performer. If you're a performer, you can't hide. If you miss the goal, if you fumble the ball into your own net, if you play a wrong note, there's no disguising the fact. You can't lie about it. It's there. And I wanted, as I said, to get to know these places a bit. And I went up to Hartlepool to coincide seeing a game there with seeing Billy Horner, his former manager, who'd given him his first contract. And Hartlepool was fascinating to me. It's it was the fourth biggest port in Britain, the fourth biggest port. And of course, it was the first place in Britain to be bombarded, to be aerially bombarded, when over 100 people were killed by destroyers just off the coast in 1914. Anyway, I went out to see Billy Horner. I got the taxi out from the station. I rang the bell, and there was no answer. So I sort of walked around the garden, and I looked through the window and tapped on it. There was he, fast asleep in his chair after lunch. And he opened the door, and I've never seen a house in my life which was so spick and span. You could have eaten your dinner off the hearth. And what was on the hearth was this huge bottle of Bell's whiskey. And he said, oh, yes, that's when I won the Manager of the Month years and years ago. He said, I'm teetotal, so I still haven't done anything about it. Anyway, I had a long chat about Keith and about his career at Hartlepool. And then he drove me around Hartlepool and showed me the town and showed how, and this is, 15 years ago, more than that, how the town had recovered and was beginning to recover, and the marina and things like that. And part of the reason I wanted to call the book A Tenner and a Box of Kippers was because it somehow evoked something very it was better to call it A Tenner and a Box of Kippers than to call it what my publisher wanted, which was some inane title like A Heading for Glory or something like that. The book was emphatically not that sort of book, and it was not written exclusively for Coventry fans. It was written for people lower end of league football, and I wanted to write about Hartlepool, and somehow A Tenner and a Box of Kippers conveyed that more. Now, the reason it's A Tenner and a Box of Kippers is because a Hartlepool manager in the 1920s bought a player for a tenner and a box of kippers, and I like kippers. I thought, well, A Tenner and a Box of Kippers, that's a nice title. Anyway, after Hartlepool, Keith went down to London for the first time, although he had been there at Crystal Palace on trial briefly when Malcolm Allison was manager. And he went down to Orient, signed for Orient. And of course, not many Cockneys were very familiar with Yorkshire accents. And they used to nickname was Hovis, because the Hovis advert voiceover was on the telly at the time. But after all this time of being on a losing side at Hartlepool and then very largely at Orient too, he went to York City, who were having a very, very good run. And somebody said to me, Keith Houchin, he was a journeyman player who had one great moment. And I thought, well, there are not many journeyman players who score 150 league goals and who play at the very top of English and Scottish football, and who scored goals in Europe for Hibernian, let alone scored one of the handful of most celebrated goals in the history of the FA Cup final. But then the great moment thing was what was interesting, because, you can go through a career as a great footballer, playing great matches and giving great performances without ever actually having a great moment. And it's very egalitarian things, great moments. There's not somebody up there who's looking down and saying, well, you've reached level X, you'll have one great moment. You've reached level Y, you'll have two. It doesn't work like that. And it was the great moment at York which put him on the map when he scored that last-minute penalty for York City, which put Arsenal out in 1984 in what was one of the great moments. And I've got a picture. One of the pictures I most like in the book is of Keith scoring that penalty. You see his leg, it's gone out, he's just kicked the ball. The ball is just crossing the line. And behind the goal, you see this huge bank of supporters. And you think, well, that's the disappointed Arsenal supporters because nobody's moving. But if you just take the photographer taking the picture 1/10 of a second too early, because then you'd have seen the whole crowd exploding, but they were still absolutely motionless, the York supporters. He loved his time at York, and I wrote in the book, I published in the book a long ballad which somebody had written, and which I reproduced in the book, which had been published, which the writer had sent to Keith, and there was a phone number on this. And all these years later, I thought, well, I better get this guy's permission to use this poem. And anyway, there was a phone number on the top of the letter. I phoned it, and the guy said, the person who answered said, well, I'm afraid he's not, he doesn't live here anymore. But I do know, I can give you the number of the person I bought the house from. So I phoned him up, and he said, well, the person I bought the house from, I don't know where he went, but he moved somewhere else in York. So I went down to the library and looked in the York phone directory, and there were 7 Wallaces. His name was Wallace. And the first 6, no, don't know anything about it. And the 7th guy, the last guy, said, yes, I'm the guy who wrote that poem. And we met up and we became great friends. And that was one of the sort of bonuses of writing the book. Then, of course, he went to Scunthorpe, Keith did, and it was really a movie made because of the money that bet really good money at Scunthorpe. He was only there a short time. John Sillett saw him score goals against Coventry in a reserve game and signed him up. And I love talking. I mean, I've talked about Billy Horner. One of the things that I enjoyed was talking to people about Keith. And as you know, you get an impression of somebody very often from peripheral things people say. And David Phillips was played for Manchester City and Cardiff and dozens of times for Wales, was Keith's big buddy at Coventry, and they always roomed together. And I phoned David up and I spoke to him about Keith. And he said, you know, he's a remarkable person because he really did. You must realize he came from a very, very poor background. And when he put poor, he didn't mean poor in terms of quality, but in terms of money. And David said he was a remarkable person and to have done so well in life. And anyway, that the Coventry bit is, you know, that the actual career there is you know the story and of the cup win. He then went to Birnian, and Scottish football for him was a completely different story in terms of refereeing decisions. And he said it was incredibly crude. And he said when he first played for Birnian, it was in the local derby against Hearts at Easter Road, and he scored the first goal for Hibs against Hearts, and he said it was incredible because all the other players just ran to the 4 corners of the ground and were sort of putting their fists up against the Hearts supporters and cheering on all their own Hibs support. And Keith said, you know, I was left in the middle of the pitch there completely alone and nobody had. Anyway, he then went to Port Vale, and I'd never been to Burslem before. I knew the potteries, but I'd not been to Burslem. So I was interested to go to Port Vale. And eventually he then went back to Hartlepool for his second time there. And I think writing a book, you have to be very careful, and you need a lot of luck, because writing a book, whether it's a biography or piece of fiction, obviously, you have a series of decisions to make. And I nearly made a very bad one over Keith, because at Hartlepool, when he went back to Hartlepool, he had terrible problems with referees, both as a player and then when he became manager. And I thought, well, I'll sort of be the sort of judge and jury as his career back at Hartlepool and all the story of these refereeing differences. And I thought, no, that's not for me to do that. I'm just a layman. I know a lot about the career. I know a lot about him, the facts, but I don't really know about these controversial moments he had with referees. So I left the book to speak for itself. And he was very, very loath when we came to do book signings ever to go back to Hartlepool. It was incredible, you know, the highest goal scorer in the history of the club, but he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And when he was having his testimonial game, the finances of the club, of course, as always, were terrible at Hartlepool. And indeed, when he was first there, he said he remembered all the players on a Friday when they got their wage packet with a check, they had to leg it to the bank because they knew that the last 2 or 3 players to pay in their checks, that they'd bounce. And it was the same when it got to the end of Keith's time as manager there. And he had a testimonial, I think it was against Middlesbrough. And he insisted that they wouldn't pay him by check, Hartlepool, they'd have to pay him with cash. And so at the end of the game, they went round to every turnstile and put all the pennies into this huge, great sack. And he went out of the Victoria Ground that night, and that was the last time he's ever been back to Hartlepool. And but there were some sort of good memories, of course, of Hartlepool. And he told me when he was shopping in York years later with his wife, and coming back to the car, he thought, oh God, I've got a ticket here, parking ticket, because there was something under the windscreen. And when he looked, it was a note, and it said, Dear Keith, saw you getting out of your car. So sorry that things ended in the way they did at Hartlepool. I just want you to know how much I'm grateful for what you did for my team. Oh, wow. And he said that really brought a frog to his throat. Anyway, the Keith, the thing that I really liked about doing the book was somebody had said to me, have you fallen out with him yet? And I said, no. And he said, well, most biographers fall out with their subjects. I said, no, the only problem I ever had with Keith, he took me aside. He said, look, there's something I want to ask you about the book. And I thought, Christ, what's he want me to leave out? What's he want me to put in to get the knife into somebody he may not have liked very much? And I said, what is it? He said, well, I wonder whether you'd mind putting in a paragraph about my in-laws, because I like them so much and I'd love you to say how much I love them. And so that was gorgeous. But I think the thing, more than anything, I loved about doing the book was I met a man of real quality. And I really like the man. We've remained good friends. And he did like the book. That's what was so good, that he really enjoyed the book. Somebody said to me that the thing they so much liked about it was that I didn't put Keith on a pedestal, and I didn't knock him down. I just let his career speak for itself. It wasn't a hagiography. It wasn't a sort of trying to get my knife into anybody or anything. Anyway, the book came out, and on the day it was published, it was out of print, because my publishers, the trouble with publishers is publishers only see what they're going to get for their money, and they think, well, he was a Coventry player, it's going to sell X number of copies in Coventry, that's it. Nobody except the commissioning editor understood that the book was every bit, if not more, about Hartlepool and the other places he played. And so we had to get that back into print very quickly, or the publishers did. What was lovely about the book signings was that, and we did several, we did 3 at Coventry, we did 1 at York, was seeing the public queuing up for his signature, the awe in their eyes. And it wasn't because they were starstruck, it was because they genuinely loved what he'd done for their football clubs and for their, obviously by implication, their lives. And but it was funny, at the Rico one day, somebody came out with his book and Keith signed it, and Keith said, well, don't you want the author's signature? And he looked at me and he said, well, if you have to. As if I didn't cut. And I didn't. That was the whole thing. Or it wasn't posted all about it, and it was my book about him. That was it was Keith who was obviously the important person. Keith came down to a book signing, to do a book signing with Talk Sport in London. And he brought down with him a chum who'd also played for Hartlepool. I can't remember what his name was. Anyway, after the interview, we went and had a drink, and then we said, well, we better go and get something to eat. It was a nice hot summer's day. And I said, well, I know it's Talk Sport Studios are just near the festival hall. And I said, I know 2 or 3 places near the Royal Festival Hall. And I was walking along, chatting to this other player, and he said, you know, I never thought today I'd be going to the Royal Festival Hall in London with a professional musician. And I laughed and I said, well, it's not every day of the week I go to the Royal Festival Hall with a couple of ex-Hartlepool United footballers.
Very good.
We both laughed. And I think it was a great thrill writing a book about Keith, so much to say about it. And the thrilling moment for me, of course, as with any book, is when you get the book from the publishers. And of course, you immediately look through to think, have they got the copy mistakes right that that were wrong? And then you sort of think, Christ, I wrote that. And this is actually the book. And Chris, I can see, has got the book, both my books out in the background. Can you see it?
Very proud part of my book collection, that is.
Well, that's very kind, Chris.
No, you were very kind in letting me see it when it came out. I haven't got Keith Houching's autograph in it, so I'll have that one day.
Okay, I'll get him to do that. Anyway,
it's a top read. It really is. I'm not just saying that.
Oh,
Jonathan's on the call. I mean,
it is available on Amazon, by the way.
Good.
Well, if you can't get it on Amazon, because it's been out of print for, I think it's out of print anyway, because it was published in 2006. But if you can't, I have got a few. Oh, it is there, yes.
Good.
But if you can't get it, I've got copies that I've got a few copies over. So do please let me know. And
Jonathan, you know, I reread it last week. I reread it. So and as a teenager, as a raw lad, he played at Chesterfield in a tournament with Len Badger.
That's right. Yes, at right back. You're playing obviously.
And Steve Camack, who had both left Sheffield United to play at Chesterfield. What an extraordinary fact that you got there. That he's a raw lad who nobody knows, and he's playing with
Len Badger.
With Len Badger. It's extraordinary research. Fantastic.
No, I can't get over the fact, Jonathan, that you've talked so much about Hartlepool and never mentioned a hanging monkey.
Well, yes, and of course that's another thing, and I do tell the whole hanging monkey story in the. But no, I loved writing about Hartlepool, and it's terrific when you sit on the non-dock side of the ground and you look out and you see this wonderful old masted ship which is overlooking the ground at that side. And no, I loved writing about Hartlepool.
The goal that he scored in the cup final was, for me, was the best goals in any cup final.
It was a wonderful goal, and I remember. So I was right on the right on the side of it, and as you can imagine, for a Coventry supporter, it was just unbelievable. And I love the way Keith describes it in the book. And he said, you know, Oggy cleared the ball, I headed it down, or Cyril headed it down for me, and I passed it out to Bennett on the right wing, and the ball came in, and Nick Pickering, who was a Geordie, he said, "Dive, Hochie, dive!" And dive he did. And extraordinary moment.
Fantastic.
Very well done.
Lovely.
Well, I read in your book, Jonathan, that they'd spent nearly 5 million on the Spurs team, and the Coventry team was well under 1 million. So
that's right, 930,000 or something. Yes.
Was it massive disparity between budgets to win the FA Cup against them? That's pretty.
And that was in the days when Coventry had quite a good budget. It wasn't like Tottenham's, but it was a hell of a lot less. And no, it was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that is interesting is that when we got all the money from the FA Cup, John Sillick went out and bought David Speedy from Chelsea, and he said, "Now we're shopping at Harrods," sort of thing. And I thought at the time, you're silly, John, because you know what is wonderful about that team, and wonderful about any team that actually works, is the balance of the players. It's not picking 11 players to go to Mars and play Mars. It's how you actually, those players, the chemistry of those players together. And just going out and signing somebody from Chelsea who scored quite a lot of goals is not actually, doesn't actually guarantee you any sort of success. It's how the whole thing works together. And, you know, with a player like Regis, who was a most wonderful footballer, but curious enough, not that marvellous a header of the ball, to sort of put him back into playing a sort of lighthouse role with Speedy next to him, and then at the expense of Houchin, who was more able to pull things together, was a serious mistake. I mean, Coventry did well for a couple of years, but that was really the beginning of the decline, and the decline of their aspirations to continue that extraordinary form.
Who was that Maltese player you had?
Michael
Jonathan?
Mifsud, yes.
Yeah, I thought he was a very good player.
Yes, he was. He scored the
He
winner.
always was against Wednesday anyway.
Yes, he scored the winner at Old Trafford in the League Cup in fairly recent years. And no, he was a good player. Very, very quick, very adept.
Did you say his
What-
name
what-
again? You broke up when you said it.
Sorry,
What was his name again? You broke up when you said it.
Michael Mifsud, Mifsud. And
Jonathan, what was the hardest part of, or the most difficult part of the book, or the part that gave you the biggest problem?
oh, I think writing about the difficulties with referees, to try and get a balance in that. But it was actually a very easy book to write. And obviously I knew the Coventry story, and I knew the chapters were going to be almost like chapters in the Bible. You know, the first chapter is actually Middlesbrough to Chesterfield, taking in his early trial games. And then it goes through each club and ends up, and there's a chapter on Wembley, and it ends up with second Hartlepool, I call it, after having first Hartlepool early in the book. And no, I think it was actually, it was hard work, but there was never any difficulty. And I found Keith so supportive, and he knew that what I was trying to do, that it was my take on his career. And it was clear to me that there were times when he was telling me things because he did want to get his knife into one or two people who got him down in his career. But no, and working with somebody who was so friendly and keen and contributed so much to the success of the book, and it could have been a nightmare. I mean, imagine writing a book about somebody like that and who you really don't like, but I did. He's a really nice man, and I've always got on very well with him.
Something to
Brian, was you refereeing at the time of Keith Houchin's career?
No, not at that level. I was at the cup final when he scored his goal. In fact, I think it might have been my first trip to Wembley. I think I got a splinter up the backside. It was those sort of seats in those days. But no, I don't ever recall actually refereeing him. And I went to Hartlepool a few times, but the most I remember about Hartlepool was that for some strange reason it was usually a midweek evening, and for an even stranger reason it was usually always hissing it down and about -10.
Yes, yes.
That's the norm in Hartlepool.
Yeah, what it was when I went.
He said that the nightmare for him was
British
doing
West Hartlepool.
Yes, that's right. He said the nightmare for him was a midweek trip down to Torquay or somewhere like that. And, you know, if you lost and you got back at 2 or 3 in the morning.
Oh dear God.
Yeah.
Well, that's what makes the game interesting, and rather than the glory the whole time, it's those mundane and humble moments that are interesting.
Yes, Ian.
5 minutes.
Just wonder if everybody else picked up. It's not so much the story of the individual; it's the way you tell the story. It's almost a story that was destined to happen, Jonathan. You
Yes.
trips to Thirsk. He was always there to meet you. You had a speedy typist who just happened to be working for you.
Oh, I was lucky. Yes, yeah.
Just things that I don't believe in fate. You know, you make your own luck and all that.
Kismet.
But some things are destined to happen, and I think that story needed to be told. And I thoroughly enjoyed the way you tell it. Thank you very much.
It's a very, very good book.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
anything further, Jonathan? To add?
Sorry?
Anything further to
No,
add?
no,
to
no,
it?
no. That's I've spoken long enough. Yes.
Right, well, how many reprints has there been at the moment?
Well, there have been several, but I don't think recently. And I think it may still be in print, and you may still be able to get a copy on Amazon. But you know, if you want a copy, let Keith know, and I'll send a copy. You know, let me have a tenner, but you can no need to pay me the box of kippers.
What about, I was going to say, will you accept 2 boxes of kippers?
Yes, I'll accept 2 boxes.
I was thinking of 2 kippers. Yeah.
2 kippers, yes.
When we used to go on holiday to the Isle of Man, anybody who was a relative that was always a bit of a pain used to get some kippers in the post because by the
Well, Jonathan, thank you for that. I found it fantastic.
Yeah, fabulous.
Thank you for
Absolutely
listening.
fabulous.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.
Right, before we move on to anyone else or anything else, Jonathan, would you like to tell us another week about your other life?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Mm.
As a musician, definitely.
As
Yes,
a
of
musician,
course.
because
Certainly.
I know that you've been involved not just as a music teacher, but
Not
you've
a
been
teacher at all, but as a player.
as
I
a
was-
player. Sorry. But I know that you've been involved with more, I'll say more famous musicians. And have you been involved with some films as well?
Oh yes, that's what I've mainly done is American and English films, and I've done lots of recordings
So-
with pop
Oh,
singers. And also,
we must hear about this.
So
Yeah.
save
They're
that
really
for
good,
another
that.
week.
They're really good.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
And
Yes, please.
Fantastic.
okay.
And then, yes, Paul the Biscuit.
Chris, I went to put The Natural onto record during the interval, and I noticed that on film 4 at exactly the same time, Eddie the Eagle's on.
Oh, I missed that. Right, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So
Well
anybody's not
spotted.
been that.
That is a
Eddie
hero.
the-
That is a hero sportsman.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a hero that man really is.
Yes.
Head case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Colin.
Yeah.
Yeah, just saying about Eddie the Eagle. I briefly met him one day at Abbotsbury Golf Club and gave him a few lessons on golf. And he didn't get any better. He was nearly as good. But yeah, he was a nice guy to talk to, and
Interesting, Colin.
We're less than a minute to go, so thank you, and we'll see you all next week. And thanks again, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Fabulous. Fabulous.
See you next week.